Hey friends, welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. I'm Danita Cummins, and today we have a truly special guest who is going to help us explore one of the most fundamental, often overlooked skills in our daily lives. Can you guess what it is? It's listening. Our guest today is Stan Slovin. He's an author who is passionate about helping the world understand the power of effective listening. And so whether you're looking to improve your connections with your family or your friends or your colleagues, this episode is packed with valuable insights that you don't want to miss. So you know what to do. Grab your cup of coffee or your favorite beverage, and let's get started.
Doing things alone is entirely overrated. We all need a community to thrive. And that's why I'm part of an online community of writers and speakers, podcasters, and entrepreneurs called Creatives. And I love it. In the years since I joined this community, I've launched new ideas, and I finally executed the dreams that sat on the shelf for years. Seriously. And I was able to do this because of the outstanding group of mentors, exceptional training, and encouraging mastermind groups with my new friends who did and continue to give me invaluable feedback. Oh, and not to mention all the fun, because we have had lots and lots of fun. Have you ever said, I want to write a book? Or do you want to use your voice for the exciting world of podcasting? If so, Called Creatives is your best resource for up-to-the-minute industry training, expert advice, live coaching, and peer support like no other. Best-selling authors and speakers Allie Worthington and Lisa Whittle lead this community with a no-competition mission, and it shows. So join my friends and I in the Called Creative community. Head to my show notes, danitacummins.com/podcast, and click the link to get all the details to join. I promise you won't regret it. I look forward to seeing you in the community and watching you grow. Hey friends, welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Danita Cummins, and today I'm joined by my new friend, Stan Slovin. He's a wealth management industry expert, I get to say. He's served in that space for over 30 years. And in that time frame, he learned how important it is for individuals and businesses to incorporate listening into their relationships, which I love because relationships are the heart of all of the things that we do. He's also the author of The Better Listening, The Secret to Improving Your Professional and Personal Life. And so he is coming on the show today to talk about tools and techniques that we can use as leaders and as people to better listen, so that can help us in our personal and professional life. So Stan, thanks so much for coming on the show today. How are you, friend?
Good. Danita, I am so happy to be with you on the Leadership Podcast. Thank you for having me.
You are so very welcome. Thanks for doing this. And do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you came to develop such a passion for developing better listening skills?
So a little bit about myself. So I am a Chicagoan from Chicago, Illinois, the heart of the Midwest, born and raised. So schooled at University of Illinois, also a lawyer by trade before wealth management, and did all of my kind of focuses. I live in Chicago, family is here. So kind of just, growing up in that Midwest area, learned a lot. So a couple things. I'm in a rock and roll band. So I hope no one holds that against me. I play keyboards and vocal.
What? That's so cool.
It's crazy. So we play around the, Chicagoland and Illinois area and Wisconsin area. But my daughter, who's 19, still thinks that her dad is very cool. So that's a very, very fun thing. So, it was interesting because I've been in the industry for like 30 years and, it's an industry where we have a lot of relationships. So it's like very sales and very customer and very developing relationships. And over the years in the early part, it was interesting because I just realized that we just were not really great listeners. In fact, society is a very response mode society. And I was thinking, I was like, I was at a conference and one of the guys that was running the conference said, you're all response mode leaders. Okay. You don't listen. You don't let people go deeper into the conversation. You're not letting them, empty their buckets. And I sat there and I thought, oh my goodness, I was doing it wrong for the first 15 years of my 30 years. And I also realized I was not a good listener. I was cutting people off or I was hijacking the conversation. And I really needed to do some self-reflection. And I thought, okay, it's not just me. I'm hearing this across the board. People were complaining, you're not hearing me. You don't understand. You're not really getting it. And it hit me. And I realized our attention spans in our society is so short and we're constantly distracted and our patience is thin and our conversations, and whether it's, political or cultural or religious, whatever it was like so many things were going on that I said, we all need to be better listeners. And we're raised to be like good listeners, right? Good listeners, but we needed to be better. And that was really kind of like where I started like this journey the last 10 years, realizing, you know what? We are cutting each other off. And we're constantly thinking about what we want to say while the other person is still talking. And basically I came with this line, and that was, we were listening to respond versus listening to understand. And that's why I wrote the book.
Wow, that's so good. We were just talking right before we hit record, like that your book is your offering of love to the world. Is that a fair assessment of you?
Yeah. That is a very fair assessment. Yes. And that I think is for everyone because, a lot of people think that, like, oh, we have to be good listeners in our job, or if we're leaders, we have to be good listeners, but we have to be great listeners in our relationship. And that's really, it reminds me of a crazy story. Like when I come home sometimes and my wife, says, oh, I had a hard day at work and a tough thing with the kids and like this. And I'm like, okay, well, let me put my superpower salver cape on. Okay. And I'm like, well, you should do this and you should say this and this. And she looks at me, she goes, wait, time out. I wasn't looking for your response. I just want you to listen to me. I wanted to vent. And there's a little interesting trick that I now do. And that is if someone's in that mode, I'll say, well, do you want me to listen to kind of what's going on? Because there's a lot going on. Or do you want me to share an observation? Do you want me to share? You tell me what would be. And they'll tell you. They'll say, no, I just want you to listen to me.
I think that's such a powerful thing. As you were just talking about that, I'm thinking everyday life, the people in our lives that matter. I feel like sometimes we put our best foot forward at work. We go out into the world, we put on our shiny shoes and we get our fancy little, I say big girl purse and my big girl hairdo, and I go to my big girl job. And then I give all of myself to that world, right? To my job, to my profession. And that's okay. There's great value in that. There's great honor in that. But then you come home at the end of the day, you're completely empty and you've poured yourself out for a job or career. And then the people that love you the most, the people that need you the most, really, they get kind of what's left over. And so it is easy, even like you're saying at the end of the day, to come in and be like, I'm tired, I'm gruffy, I'm not listening, I'm not seeing my kids, I'm not seeing my spouse. And those are the ones that need us the most, in retrospect. So I appreciate that you offered that at the beginning, like for the people who are listening who are like, well, I'm not leading a team, or I'm not leading a company, or I'm not, how does this apply to me? But I think, Evel, the tools you'll give us today are, you can see that every single person can take something from what you've learned. So
yeah. And I think it's really important, especially in our society today, because a lot of people will just say like, oh, we have such a divisive country, or, oh, you know what, it's so hard to talk to this person because they can never get them to listen to me. When in reality, a lot of us are crying not to just be heard, but crying to move past that surface conversation. Like it's very reactive. So if a person says something to a friend or a spouse or a child, or a teacher, student, or a employer, employee, when they're talking, it's like, well, you know what, I was thinking about this, and the person says, okay, well, let me tell you, it's very respond immediately. And I think better listening, and not just the book, but just generally speaking from a philosophical standpoint, better listening really says, how do we move the response mode later in the conversation? Okay. So it turns it from a surface response conversation, which that's our life. If you're with friends, if you've ever noticed, if you're with friends and you're in a conversation, the conversation gets louder and louder and louder, and everyone's cutting off each other. It's one word responses. And you're like, that is not a conversation. That is a competition. Or I love when you're at a dinner. This is my favorite, when you're at a dinner with like 5 other couples and someone starts telling a story. And the spouse jumps in and says, well, no, that's not really what it was. It was a smaller restaurant. It wasn't a big restaurant. And the person looks at it and says, okay. And then they go on with their story, right? And and we ordered this and this. And the person jumps and says, well, we didn't really order that. And the person finally says, do you want to tell the story? Because obviously you want to tell the story because you're like jumping, you're not letting me finish. And interesting enough, if you think deeper into that, you're hurting the person's feelings. You're making them feel uncomfortable, sometimes even embarrassed, and almost to the point where they'll stop talking, or they'll be a little bit more silent because they're not being allowed to share without that interruption. And that happens not just in our personal lives, but it happens at work all the time. That's why employers, who are really good leaders, they realize that they have to value their employees' feedback. Okay. It's not just giving them airtime. It's actually listening so that they can feel valued, so that the people that are speaking to their bosses, their leaders, or the ones that they're working with feel that their comments are valued, that their opinions are taken serious. And that's where you get retention. That's where the environment is much more positive. And they always say good leaders are ones that will hear. Great leaders are ones that listen, because they're using that as valuable tools. And that helps with retention, with hiring, with profitability, all of those areas that go with leadership and ownership.
I think that's so important in terms of like psychological safety right? When we talk about that in leadership circles, how do you create psychologically safe workspaces for people to be comfortable to lay that on the table, right? Their thoughts, their feelings, those kinds of stuff. And I think there are a lot of times where we give the platitude and leaders are busy, right? Or you've got a lot of things going on or too many voices in the room. It seemed to be overwhelming. But I think for me, the leaders that I valued the most in my career were the ones that I don't necessarily need you to take my opinion and change the direction of the project or the plan. There are probably a lot of other factors that I can't see, but just that person who takes the time, like you said, to listen and to actually receive the information and to consider it, I think that is such a powerful offering that we can give to our teams.
And Danita, it's interesting because when that's accomplished, and you bring up a really interesting point where there's actually a meeting of the minds or a respectful and a considerate environment, a mutual respect, you also, I think, increase your collaboration. So it creates an environment where now everyone is feeding off each other. They're encouraging each other. They're not shy or nervous that what they're going to say is going to, affect an output or an input. It will improve, the overall content. And it's funny because there's a famous quote that says, when you talk, you're the only one, repeating what you've already known, But if you listen, you may actually learn something new. And that's where you hear leaders. There's a great book, Good to Great, by Sullivan, where, it talks about where there's good leaders, where they, run a good ship and everything, but great leaders are great listeners and have likability because you want to create in that environment. I mean, ask yourself, how often do you get employees that are sharing with you ideas or having strong input or that you are actually valuing, or are you just on your agenda? And you have to get through your agenda and you're just talking at the group as opposed to you're talking with the group. And they say that when leaders listen more, they'll level up their development. They'll level up. That's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, not 2 mouths and 1 ear. That's why I think at the end of the day, that's where leaders find the most value in their employees is when they give them a platform, an environment, and a respect to really be of value to whatever project or work that they're working on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think not always having to have the solution is a very important part of that leadership journey too. Like you said, the humility and the authenticity or vulnerability to say, I don't have all the answers, but being willing to listen, I think is such a great offering. I was just having a mentoring call yesterday with a soldier, active duty soldier who's going to be entering the workforce. And he was asking me after the conversation, he said, what do you think the number one soft or hard skill is for a person who's transitioning from military, into the civilian sector? And I said, hands down, emotional intelligence, empathy, and humility, like hands down, right? Because those are such learned traits. You don't ever get there, emotional intelligence or humility or empathy. There's always a depth. There's such a depth of that. But I feel like as a leader or transitioning back to your diversity conversation and this conflict that we have, if we could create that space where we could enter that space with degrees of humility first and empathy first, I do feel like many of our conversations in the world would be deflected. They wouldn't be nearly as contentious. And the people on the other side of the table, whether or not we came to an agreement at the end or we came to see eye to eye or not, we would have a commonality, right? We could come to a common place. So I think that's so great.
I love the 3 that he mentioned because it really brings a person more down from, again, being a practicalist to really more of an emotional time. I think the emotional intelligence, as you mentioned, and the humility is really important. But that empathy, this is where historically people have had always active listening. That's your eye contact. That's your leaning in. That's your, nodding and, your acknowledgments. Okay. Those active listening skills have a challenge today, and it's called distractions. Our distractions in our society really put a thwart into the effectiveness of active listening. So your phone, your computer, texting, the noise around us, everything and anything really challenges that active listening. So that in itself, because historically, our brains can only focus so much and for so little of a time. So when there's a lot of distractions, that's one area that people could work on, their active listening. But that's historically, we always can do that. The reflective listening, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, the reflective listening is a game changer because there you have literally figured out how to move that conversation. But in between that, and I love what you said, the third thing that he brought up was empathy. When you think of empathy, even in your conversations as a podcast, host or interviewer, how do you get a person to get a little bit more empathetic in that conversation? Or how do you draw them out? And is it important? Do you think it's important in the conversations to make sure that you're including like empathy, for example?
I do think so. To answer the first question, how do I draw that out? I think for me, I strive to create a space where conversations are not contentious, right? And offering perspective. And so you'll see that, a lot when a conversation just starts or a person has a certain bias. We make judgments about people. Like we do that all the time, right? We just human design, the ladder of inference. We're always inferring someone's value system based on their actions or what we see their actions to be, right? So that's a normal thing that's always happening to us. And so the more that I can offer like benefit of the doubt. Well, what about this perspective? Well, maybe the person has this or that. Have we considered these potential things that are going on in their life, right? I offer that first is try to get the person to maybe step back and see, oh, okay, maybe, it's not exactly the way I see it. There's another perspective. There's another viewpoint. There is a way that I could approach this. I mean, that's just kind of generally what I do all the time. And I think that once you can do that first thing, they'll accept there's another viewpoint or another opportunity or another potential way. Then you can start to then lean into that. Right. And then I think it comes with time and trust too. Like you and I just met each other. So we're probably not going to lay all our heavy stuff on the relationship bridge today, Stan. Like, how's your marriage? We're probably not going to do that today. What's your worst fear? But over time with trust, we create that relationship bridge is what I call it, where I'm okay to lay stuff on it. And then you'll lay a heavy piece on it and I'll lay another piece on it. And together we build this bridge together. So I think it comes with degrees of that over time. So you and I might be able to have a degree of empathy and respect for this conversation, and we can put some things on it, but I'm not going to expect you to put all your heavy stuff on this conversation today.
Yeah, no, and the reason why I asked is because this is the feedback I think that most people feel, and that is when they feel that they're not being heard or they're not being listened to. It is not because the other person is just like a loud talker or just barking. It's because when they're talking, they're not allowing that person to kind of go a little bit deeper in their feelings, okay? Because empathy it's a structured listening. It's a questioning technique that allows the listener to develop and enhance the relationship with just a stronger understanding of what the person is trying to say. So, we know it as we ask the person a question, they give us a response. And by saying to them, listen, that's common. I hear that all the time. In fact, you're not the only one that's going through. In fact, a lot of people have challenges at work with their bosses or had a bad day, with a friend situation or their kids are giving them a problem. And again, number one, you're not alone, okay? Because right now with everything going, but tell me more about that because that's important to you. And I want to try to make sure I understand. And they will actually go deeper and they will clarify their initial statement. That we want to respond. Oh, it's a tough day at work. It's okay. Everyone goes through that. But let's talk about something else. We didn't give them a chance to share that last part. And that's where if you take active listening and reflective listening, but if you add empathy in there, now you have a total listening experience. And that's where you're going to learn more from that person. They're going to share things that they were not thinking, that they were going to share before. And you're not forcing them, you're allowing them. So before kind of responding, I always say to people is, ask the speaker, tell me additionally, like what else? Other than really at work, what else? Well, you want to hear? You know what? My daughter decides that she wants to, change jobs and my son wants to transfer from the college that he always wanted to go to. Okay, well, how are we doing with that? Because again, that's not the first time. A lot of people will do that. Well, you know what? We're having a hard time with it. And now they literally feel, oh my gosh, you are really hearing what is going on. And I really feel that you are, like you said before, connecting in a way that is different than just a normal conversation. That would be one great suggestion today for your listeners. And I still try to do it all the time, is throw empathy into your conversations. And it will also change the direction. You'll get a better understanding. They'll feel better. And then the connection and the results, I think, is going to be stronger and more productive.
And I think what you said in the beginning, right, about not having the intention of this conversation equals solution, giving yourself the freedom to not have to solve every problem. It goes back to what is this relationship about? And do I value this relationship? Because like with my spouse, clearly I value that relationship with my spouse. We've been together for 20 plus years, Clearly, I value the relationship with my kids. They're adult kids now. So those conversations are a lot different, than dinner time when they were 6, 7, 8, and they were all competing at the table. And it was very loud and very, stop interrupting your brother. Your sister's trying to talk about her day. We did all those. But I think giving yourself the freedom to say, I can enter this conversation with this person and truly hold space for them. And it'd be okay that at the end of it, my agenda is not to solve a problem. My agenda is to, like you said, is to kind of just create that relationship or strengthen this relationship. Do you find that kind of just approaching the conversation, listening in a different manner helps you do those things?
Yeah, I would think it helped everybody. I mean, it helped me because I was horrible, okay? And I realized that. I'm the first person, in fact, it's so funny. Before I even say, I'll tell you my corrective mode, I would be in the car even today, and I wrote the book, okay? I would be in the car, we're driving home, my wife would tell me something about what's going on with the kids. I would say something, and she goes, are you not listening to me? Like, you wrote the book. You wrote the book and you're not hearing what I'm saying. Even when we think that we have mastered something, we're continuously trying to improve on. But from a standpoint of a really hardcore, quick corrective mode, I changed the way that I would respond so that I could allow myself to let the other person really get deeper. So the first thing I did really was I paused. That's my first suggestion to everybody is just pause. I call it the 2-second pause. When someone's talking to you and they're bringing something, don't respond. Okay, just pause for a second. Take a break. Second thing that I always say is just clarify. First reflect. The reflection. It sounds like, or from what I'm hearing, or the feeling that I'm getting from like this conversation is that you're doing any kind of reflecting. It's not parroting. Like you're not responding back. Like a person says, "Oh, I had a really bad day." Oh, you had a really bad day. It's not parroting. It's saying like, "Okay, so this was kind of a tough day today for a couple reasons like that." Don't respond though, because that's when we as humans want to respond because we heard something, right? We think we got it and we are ready to take it on. And this is where we want to take, again, that pause after you reflect. And this is where the clarification opens up the door. So it sounds like you had a really bad day at work, or it sounds like the project you're working on is not really getting a great acceptance. Tell me about that more. Help me understand that. Can you clarify that? I understand what you're saying, but take me through that a little bit more. I want to understand that more. And they will. 100% of the time, they will move forward and tell you, and that deeper is going to move from our human surface response to what we're really feeling, what's really going on. So now you kind of know this is where you put your empathy in, okay? Now the feeling part comes in, and before you respond, you check in. Okay, so we got that. Sounds like this, and what else? What else? Is there anything else that goes with it? And they will usually do 1 or 2 more things. That is a whole different conversation because now when you're responding, it's just you're now in a much better frame of mind to respond. And that other person, has moved you. They've helped you get to a place where you could. So that's really the technique. That's the process. It's just like a 4-step process. 5 is you pause, you reflect, you clarify, you empathize, you check in, and then respond.
Do you have any tips or advice for a person who is on the other side of that, right? So we hope in our daily life that we have leaders who say, okay, I'm going to do this space. But what does the person do? Is there tools or tips that the person can use to try to encourage that listening without being direct, like on the nose, like, hey, you're not listening to me. I need you to use these 4 steps to make it better. Like, is there a way that you can lead the other person to this new listening technique, but do it in a way that's gentle and kind?
I like the term gentle and kind because I think that we all hear things sometimes that's not a great approach. So I'll use your example. Let's say we're at work and there's a project and you're hearing someone and obviously you're noticing that they're not listening, okay? And they didn't listen to the person. You're like, oh my goodness, this would have been a great opportunity. The coaching moment, the feedback moment is really the opportunity to go back to that person after, or maybe if it's a break and say, listen, this is a really important project. And it looks like that you have a lot of important things that you're trying to tackle. But what's interesting is that, you're asking questions. And it seems that when the person is asking, I think that there's more that we can learn. I think that there's more that we can observe. I think that there's more we can take from. And again, I'm just putting an observation here that I think if we ask the person when we get back to the conversation, or maybe next time, hey, same question, but when they respond, let's go deeper. Let's reflect a little bit. Make sure that we're understanding what the issue is. And then I would love to hear a clarification because it was great that they responded, but I think there was more. When you think that, don't you think that there was probably more going on? And if we give that person a chance, because they are an expert, we brought them in, we're paying them, and we're tapping into them, and we're not really allowing them to empty their bucket. That's a great term. That way, you're not really criticizing the person like, hey, you didn't listen. We didn't get anything out of this, as opposed to, this was great, but I think if we go back into this next meeting, I'd like to get a little bit more clarification. I'd like them to empty a little bit more of their bucket to find out, because they have such a great expertise that I don't want it just to become a surface conversation and a quick response mode, discussion. And this is another great one. And there's now your soft comment, and your polite comment is, I think it will open up for more impactful conversation if we do that. I think that we could also have a deeper discussion. I think we could have also a more meaningful dialogue. Those three areas are great, soft, friendly ways of saying, hey, it's okay how you did it, but maybe we could do it a little bit better when they come back from their break. Does that help a little bit?
It did. And I'm thinking you could take that same model to like your marriage or relationship or things where it's not in a work environment, and or you don't have a third party that's kind of, doing that, right? So if you have individual A, like me, I'll use my example. I come home from work and I'm saying I had a hard day, and my husband's like, well, me too. And so you're kind of like, well, the conversation's now over, all right, well, I'll make dinner. So, but I think what, some of the things I picked up on what you just said was maybe not right then, is maybe not a coaching time, especially if people are tired, but sitting down and saying, even with your family or people that are important to you, like, hey, when we have a conversation or next time, I'd like to try to empty my bucket, or I have these other things, wanting to have a richer conversation. You don't always have to solve all the problems, like you said with, your wife. And I'm just here trying to process this with you. And then you could caveat that going forward, like in your relationships with the people that you love. I feel like in our family, we use code words for things that are important to us that we've developed over the years, So if something's really important to our family, we'll say, hey, I show you my pine cone? And that's a whole story from years ago. But when we say that, everybody who's listening knows, oh, this is really important. I need to stop what I'm doing and pay attention to this person and give them my undivided attention. It's really important. Work environment might be a little different unless your teammates are really close and you have a really good bond. But I think even doing that in your personal relationships, being like, hey, I'd just like to process this with you. I don't want to solve anything right now, but can we do that? I'm just trying to give tools and language to people.
Yeah, the team thing, though, is really important. And I love that. I'll share a quick story, but this is a great team building. It's a great team process. In fact, again, if anyone has a chance, they read the book, or if they want to, further conversation and do a team building, you can let your team know, hey, I'd love for us to have a little bit more of a better environment from a conversation standpoint, a communication standpoint. I keep noticing that strong teams have strong communications. And one of the things that I'm noticing, and a great way to start is like, and I'm probably the biggest culprit of it, okay, because that always is a great way to start, is that I think that we're really kind of cutting off each other too much. I think that we're in too much of a response mode. I'm not really hearing what everyone is kind of really trying to accomplish. I think that it's just like a quick agenda and we're getting done and we move on. I think I want to slow it down. I love to pause a little bit more. I love our conversations and then go through those kind of steps. I did get authors, by the way, new authors love to get feedback. So when they write reviews, so I'm reading a review and the CEO of a company sends like, hey, Stan, read your book on the plane coming home. By the way, it's not a Harry Potter 700-page book. So you can knock it out in 140 pages, okay? But he starts writing, he's like, hey, I read your book, picked up some really fun listening tabs, but that, great listening tips, and it was great and a refresher, but that's not my review. I get home, I'm at the kitchen table with my daughter. I'm having dinner. And she looks at me and says, Dad, I'm having a really bad day. I'm not liking what's going on with work. And I'm also in kind of a little bit of a tiff with one of my best friends. When I was about to put my parental hat on and give her parental pontification was the word, okay? I stopped and I paused. And I reflected with her, it sounds like, and I clarified, Stan. I remember getting her to tell me a little bit more. And he's writing this is right. And then when she was done, I was very empathetic and said, hey, it's okay because not everyone's here. I said, and then he said, but tell me more. She goes on for 15 minutes, Stan. And when she was done, she stood up, turned around, gave me a hug and said, Dad, thank you for finally listening to me. So that to me was the aha moment of this is it. This is the epitome of whether it's a spouse or adult siblings, where brothers and sisters haven't talked that much, or mom and dads or best friends haven't talked, and they're thinking, it's so hard. Here was a way that a father just really allowed the daughter to just share how she's feeling and share in a way that she was comfortable and know it was a safe environment and know that she wasn't rushed and there was no judgment. And at the end was so appreciative of it that it strengthened the relationship forever.
That's so good. Are there any other tools that you've, like you said, learned, like any other tools or techniques that you want to offer outside the framework of the book that we can use to improve our communications or our listening skills as a leader?
It's a tough one because the other side of the coin, okay, is the person that says, I can't listen to them for an hour, okay, or they just talk too much, or they get into a conversation and they know it's going to be a long conversation and they don't have the patience or the frame of mind. And they're like, how do I stop these long conversations? So that's also a challenge from a standpoint of a person that says, you know what, if I do this, I'm going to be listening to this person like for an hour and a half and I can't. So one really neat little technique is doing a pause and interruption, but in a way that you look for a break. So the person is talking and talking and talking, and you say, wait, hang on one second. That's interesting what you just said, because that's an important part. And I've heard that before, and I know that that's something that you're trying to accomplish, and then go into breaking the conversation, talk a little bit, and then say, hey, listen, I know that we can talk more about this. I do have a meeting in a few minutes, but let's continue that because that's one thing that obviously is important. And I heard that. That's one way. The other way that leaders will do it is that when they know that the person knocks on the door and they're like, oh no, here we go, they can set expectations. Hey, come on in and everything like that. Listen, just before you sit down, I have about 10 minutes. Okay. I don't want to be rude. I just want to get what's going on. And then you're letting the person know that there's a time frame, even though they don't realize that they're just a talker. And that way you're setting expectations, you're setting your barriers, you're setting your parameters. And if it breaches that, you can go into the interruption. And the interruption is not saying, hey, stop talking because I'm done listening. It's more of like, hey, wait, hang on with that. Because I like what you're saying on that. That's an important part. And then you should have some input and then come back and say, listen, we're going to wrap this up, but I want to continue that. That way you're moving along. That way you're listening now to the small section that you are willing to do as opposed to just spacing out or getting out of there. That's the one technique. And the last one I would say is just, I'll throw a question out there if I can. I call it a golden ticket question. It's a great question for leaders and owners, or it's a great question like if you're a parent on a board of directors, or if you're on a sports team or a church or congregation, whatever, and you're about to get into like a leadership role. Okay. A great question to ask is, what's most important to you? So, Danine, if I said to you, like, what's most important to you with regards to relationship with a person on your podcast? Give me one. What's important to you when you're talking to a person on your podcast?
For them to feel seen and valued, and for them to have an opportunity to come on the show and share their story and know that they were respected and that I held space for them, that they are seen and valued.
Okay, so perfect illustration, seen and valued, opportunity to share and respect it, okay? I would have never known that, ever, if I had not asked you, because that was most important to you, not me, not the speaker, but the listener. If I ask a person, what's most important to you with regards to a relationship when we do this project or when I join your board, or what's most important to you with relationship to a person who's going to be coaching your kids, soccer, volleyball, you're allowing them to share what's most important. And once you know what's most important, you can build the relationship off of that. And that will solidify new relationships, referrals, retention, growth, productivity, profitability from the business standpoint, and then from the personal standpoint, like you said, when you get home and you're talking with your spouse and there's like that one answer thing, and you said, let me ask you this, what's so important to you, okay, with regards to just the last couple of days, just what's going on? And they will tell you, and that's a great open question to do. So I leave my one thing, it's a chapter in the book. It talks about getting back to the basics, open-ended questions, right? So we know that, we all know that on this call, but we forget that. Move away from those yes and no questions and go back to those open. Tell me about this. How does that look? Where do you see that fitting? What are some of the areas? Any of those open-ended questions gives that person a chance to actually talk, and we learn more. Those are last tips.
Those are amazing. I'm going to make sure I write those down. I'll have to go back and listen to this episode. So I guess you are doing some speaking and teaching. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how people can find you? And other than the book, obviously, which we'll share in the show notes, but do you want to talk a little bit about those other ways where they can find you and how you can help them to be better listeners?
Sure. Well, first of all, when I wrote the book, I always said we're all good listeners. We could just be better listeners like that. Because I do believe that. I really do. And Better Listening, the book and everything, you can find that on Amazon. That's easy. Just, Amazon.com, Better Listening in my name. But I also really enjoy speaking to groups and to companies and to associations. So if you have a leadership council and you're trying to accomplish leadership and listening, or if you have a company where you may have like a sales force and you're like, wow, I need them to be better listeners, okay? Because I think that will help. But those are great areas for people to contact me, and I'd be happy to talk about just, helping their company, their association, their group, anything to help them better communication and also develop more meaningful conversations and dialogues.
That's super good. So we'll add that info in the show notes, like I said, so people can reach out to you. So do you think now that you're post-publishing and you're a published author, do you think there are more books for you in your future? Do you plan on writing more books, or do you think this was your one for now?
I will tell you, it's funny. My goal when someone says, why did you write a book? My first reason was I always wanted to be a published author. I thought it'd be really cool. My second reason was, you know what? I really wanted to give back. I love giving back. And because I felt like I had such a problem and I wanted to overcome that. And I thought I learned so much, maybe like that CEO, maybe it will touch someone in a certain way. And then the third reason is I thought, maybe it brings a little bit of credibility. It's kind of cool. Like when I get like introduced now on stage or things like, an author of, so that's always kind of fun, to do. It is fun. But at the end of the day, some of the proceeds go to mental health, which I'm very involved in, and children with disabilities. So that was really one of the main also reasons is that I'm very involved in that from a community standpoint. And I thought, hey, how can I do that and have fun doing that? And then also give back to the, community and to, help others.
No, that's so good. We probably could have you back on the show to talk about the mental health stuff and the things that you do. I can just, from three thoughts that went through my head of thinking like how powerful better listening is in that space, right? I had a gentleman come on the podcast last year. I think he's the executive director for the Jones Project, and it's in Kansas City, and it was founded after a gentleman who took his own life. So they work really hard. They go into middle schools and high schools and maybe some elementary schools too, and just talk about trying to break down the mental health stigma, right? Breaking down those barriers for students to be able to know they're not alone, exactly like you said, and to feel seen and heard, and then also giving them a safe place, a place to reach out, and then educating and equipping, teachers and guidance counselors and the people who have an enormous job. My hat always goes off to educators, people who are called in that space. It's such a hard space. So yeah, maybe you can come back.
The Jones Project, I'm going to look at that because, first of all, I'm sorry I'm about that story, because it's so hard right now in our society. A person can learn very similar, Rebecca'sDream.org, but very interesting you mentioned that is that awareness and that ending that stigma and giving them support and hope and tools. And by the way, not just for those that are living with depression, bipolar, those areas of mental health, but those around them. And that's something that we all are working on, trying to help, everyone kind of really just help those that are living with. And there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of support out there, and we're trying to reduce the stigma. So thank you so much for raising that today. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, be happy to put that in the show notes as well. I do. Yeah, definitely would love to share it. I have a heart for I work in a crisis pregnancy center. So I've spent, 13 years working in outreach and helping families who are kind of going through crisis. And then I have lots of military, right? Family and friends, like we talked about before, being in the military space, struggling with PTSD and suicide and just a litany of things that our friends and people we love have gone through over the years. And just like you said, the people who it might not be you're not directly struggling with it, but you're holding space for someone that you love who is. And that's a hard space to be in. Yeah, for sure.
But it's good that we can talk about it now. That's the cool part, is that our society can talk about it. I always say it's okay to not be okay. We're never allowed to even say that. And that is now the theme of all themes, is it's okay to not be okay. And there is support and there are go-tos and there's resources and you could talk to people. You don't have to be silent anymore. And that's the beginning of really what we need to continue to work on. But yeah, job not done, but definitely some progress. But it's great, the work that you do. So congratulations on that.
You too. Thank you so much. Yes. Stan, this has been amazing. I'm so glad you came on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was great. It was really a great conversation, and I hope it was beneficial for everyone, but it was great learning about what you do, and you have a great podcast. You're a great interviewer. I love the questions also, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we'll keep in touch with Stan. So everybody listen to the show, and we'll keep updates on his new amazing journey and all the great things that he and his community are doing. So thank you. Thank you.
Are you a CEO or nonprofit leader seeking to clarify your organization's strategy and to level up your leadership skills? Well then, friend, we should totally talk. Through Organizational Growth Consulting, I help you create a clear plan for your organization to grow. You'll gain clarity to learn how to leverage your strengths and identify the roadblocks that keep you and your team from moving forward. Together, we'll design a comprehensive plan to help you increase your revenue and build a healthy team. So if you'd like more information, just jump over to danitacummins.com/consulting today for all the details, or click the contact link on our website to schedule a free discovery call. Don't forget to grab a copy of my free strategic planning checklist, which is designed to help you streamline your planning process, ensuring that every decision propels your business forward. I'm excited to help you build clarity and confidence to make a powerful impact in the world.